The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of the Wellington estate, casting long rectangles of light across the polished marble floor. Elena Morales pushed her cleaning cart down the East Wing corridor, her footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. At 52, she had spent nearly 15 years cleaning this mansion, learning its rhythms and secrets while remaining almost invisible to the family who lived here. Today was Tuesday, which meant the music room needed attention. Elena enjoyed Tuesdays. Unlike the crowded dining room or the cluttered studies, the music room held a special kind of peace. The centerpiece of the room was a magnificent grand piano, a Steinway that probably cost more than she would earn in her lifetime. Elena entered the room and began her routine. She dusted the bookshelves lined with musical scores, wiped down the antique metronome, and carefully cleaned around the delicate crystal figurines displayed on the side tables. She saved the piano for last, as she always did. Working methodically, Elena ran her microfiber cloth over the glossy black surface, careful not to leave streaks or fingerprints. The morning light caught the golden Steinway logo, making it gleam like actual treasure. When she finished with the exterior, she gently lifted the lid to dust the strings and hammers inside. As she worked, her mind wandered to another time, another life. Before coming to America, before marriage and children and divorce, before the endless cycle of cleaning other people's beautiful things, Elena had played the piano. Nothing fancy, just lessons at the community center in her hometown outside Buenos Aires. Her teacher had once told her she had a gift, but life had taken her down a different path. Elena closed the lid carefully and moved to lower the fallboard over the keys. Her hand hesitated. The house was empty today. Lady Wellington was at her charity luncheon. The lord of the house was traveling for business. And the daughter, the serious young woman, with sad eyes who barely acknowledged Elena's existence, had left earlier for her morning classes. No one would. No, Elena's fingertips brushed against the cool ivory. Just one note, she told herself. She pressed down gently on middle C, the pure tone ringing out in the empty room. The sound stirred something inside her, a forgotten longing, a buried dream. Before she realized what she was doing, her right hand formed a simple chord, then another. Her left hand joined in with a bass line she remembered from long ago. The melody was hesitant at first, like a conversation between strangers, but soon grew more confident. It was an old folk song her grandmother had taught her, filled with the bittersweet taste of memory. Elena closed her eyes, letting her fingers rediscover the keyboard. She wasn't aware of her surroundings anymore. Not the expensive room, not her cleaning cart waiting in the corner, not the fact that she was breaking an unspoken rule by touching what wasn't hers. For a few precious moments, she was just a woman making music. She didn't hear the soft footsteps approaching the doorway, didn't notice when they stopped, didn't see the young woman standing there transfixed. Catherine Wellington had forgotten her sheet music. Her instructor would be furious if she arrived for her lesson empty-handed again. She had rushed back to the house, intending to grab the music and leave immediately, but the sound coming from the music room stopped her in her tracks. Someone was playing the piano, not with the technical precision her instructors demanded, but with genuine emotion. The melody carried a sense of yearning that Catherine instantly recognized, though she'd never been able to capture it in her own playing despite years of expensive lessons. Catherine peered through the doorway and felt her jaw drop. It was the cleaning lady, Mrs. Morales, if she remembered correctly. The woman who quietly moved through their house with downcast eyes and respectful nods was now sitting at the family's prized piano, playing with closed eyes and a face transformed by joy. For 20 years, Catherine had lived the life expected of her as the only daughter of the Wellington family. Private schools, cotillions, charity events, and endless music lessons, all preparing her for a future that seemed mapped out since birth. But in all her years of disciplined study, she had never played with the natural feeling this cleaning woman showed. Elena reached the end of her song, letting the final notes linger in the air. As the sound faded, reality rushed back. She quickly closed the fallboard and stood up, smoothing her uniform with trembling hands. That's when she noticed a movement at the door and turned. Their eyes met across the room, the cleaning lady and the aristocratic young woman, both frozen in shock. "I'm so sorry, Miss Wellington," Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper. Her heart pounded wildly in her chest as she imagined losing her job, losing her income, losing the means to support herself. I was just finishing up. I didn't mean to. That was beautiful, Catherine interrupted, stepping into the room. At 20, Catherine had her mother's refined features and her father's serious demeanor. She rarely smiled, at least not genuinely, but there was wonder in her eyes now as she approached the piano. What was that piece? I don't recognize it. Elena clutched her cleaning cloth like a shield. Just an old song from my country, miss. Nothing important. I apologize for touching the piano. It won't happen again. Catherine tilted her head slightly, studying the older woman as if seeing her for the first time. How long have you been playing? Oh, I don't play, miss. Not really. Just a few lessons when I was a girl. Elena began gathering her cleaning supplies, avoiding the young woman's gaze. I should finish my work now. But you do play. I just heard you. Catherine moved closer to the piano, her fingers tracing the same keys Elena had touched moments before. You played differently. Elena paused, uncertain how to respond. Was she in trouble or not? I've been taking lessons since I was 4 years old, Catherine continued, her voice softer now. My mother insists that a Wellington woman must be accomplished in music. But my instructors always say I lack feeling. A hint of bitterness crept into her words. Yet you sat down without any sheet music and played with more emotion than I've managed in 16 years of training. The young woman looked up, meeting Elena's eyes directly for what felt like the first time ever. There was no anger there, only curiosity and perhaps a touch of envy. Would you play again? Catherine asked. Please? Elena glanced nervously toward the doorway. Your mother is at her luncheon until 3. My father is in London until Thursday. Catherine's lips curved into a small smile. It's just us. Something in the young woman's expression, a mixture of admiration and longing, made Elena set down her cleaning supplies. Slowly, she returned to the piano bench. Her hands hovered over the keys, suddenly self-conscious. I'm not very good, she warned. Not like your teachers. Play like you did before, Catherine urged, when you thought no one was listening. Elena took a deep breath and began to play again. This time she chose a lullaby she used to sing to her children when they were small. It was simple but heartfelt, rising and falling like gentle waves. As she played, she forgot to be nervous. Forgot about the difference in their positions. Forgot everything except the music. When she finished, there was a moment of perfect silence. How do you do that? Catherine asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Do what? Make it sound like you're telling a story. Like you're speaking through the piano. Elena considered the question. I think about what the music means to me. The memories it brings. The feelings. She shrugged slightly. My teacher once told me that technique can be learned, but music must be felt. Catherine nodded slowly, as if absorbing a profound truth. My recital is in 3 weeks. I'll play perfectly, hit every note exactly as written, and everyone will applaud politely. She sighed. And it will mean nothing. For the first time, Elena saw beyond the privilege and wealth to the young woman beneath. Someone trapped by expectations, struggling to find her own voice. Would you? Catherine hesitated, then straightened her shoulders with sudden determination. Would you play something else? Something you love? Elena should have said no. Should have returned to her duties. Should have maintained the careful distance between employer and employee. Instead, she smiled and turned back to the keyboard. As morning stretched into afternoon, 2 women from entirely different worlds shared the language of music, one playing from the heart, the other listening with growing understanding. Neither realized that this unexpected encounter would change both their lives in ways they couldn't imagine. Outside, the Wellington estate remained as it always had been, grand, imposing, a monument to wealth and social standing. But inside the music room, something new had taken root, as delicate and powerful as the first notes of a symphony just beginning to unfold. The following morning, Elena arrived at the Wellington estate earlier than usual. Her mind had replayed yesterday's unexpected piano session throughout the night, leaving her with mixed feelings of joy and worry. Had she crossed a line? Would there be consequences? She moved through her morning tasks with extra care, listening for any sign of Catherine. The house remained quiet except for the occasional creaking of the old pipes and the distant sound of the gardener trimming hedges outside. By mid-morning, Elena had convinced herself that yesterday had been a one-time occurrence. a momentary connection that would now fade back into the usual distant politeness. Then as she was polishing the banister in the main hallway, she heard footsteps on the stairs. "Mrs. Morales?" Catherine's voice was tentative, lacking its usual confidence. "Do you have a moment?" Elena looked up to see the young woman dressed casually in jeans and a simple blouse, a stark contrast to her usual formal attire. Her hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail, making her look younger than her 20 years. "Of course, Miss Wellington." Elena set down her polishing cloth, trying to read the expression on Catherine's face. Was she in trouble after all? "I've been thinking about yesterday," Catherine said, then glanced around as if checking for eavesdroppers. "Could we talk? In the music room, perhaps?" Elena nodded, following Catherine down the hallway. Her hands fidgeted with the edge of her uniform, unsure what to expect. When they entered the music room, Catherine closed the door behind them, something that had never happened before. "Please sit." Catherine gestured to one of the velvet armchairs near the window. When Elena hesitated, Catherine added, "Please, I'd like to talk to you properly." Elena perched awkwardly on the edge of the chair while Catherine took the seat opposite her. For a moment, neither spoke. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, highlighting dust particles floating in the air between them. Two women from different worlds, suddenly unsure of the rules that had always governed their interactions. "I called my instructor this morning and canceled today's lesson," Catherine finally said. "I told her I needed time to practice on my own." She looked directly at Elena. "But really, I wanted to ask you something." "Yes?" Elena's voice came out barely above a whisper. "How did you learn to play like that? With such feeling?" Catherine leaned forward, her expression earnest. "You said you only had a few lessons as a girl, but what I heard yesterday..." She shook her head in wonder. "That wasn't just basic training." Elena's gaze dropped to her hands, working hands with short nails and a few calluses, so different from Catherine's perfectly manicured fingers. "I had a good teacher," she said softly. "Back in Argentina, Senor Vasquez ran the community music program. He couldn't afford a proper studio, so he taught in the back room of his brother's grocery store. The piano was old and some keys stuck, but he treated it like it was a treasure." A small smile formed on Elena's lips as the memory came into focus. "He used to say that technical skill is something you learn with your hands, but music comes from your heart. I only studied with him for 3 years, but he changed how I understood music." "What happened after those 3 years?" Catherine asked. Elena's smile faded. "Life happened. My father lost his job at the factory. My mother got sick. There was no money for extras like piano lessons." She shrugged, a gesture meant to suggest it didn't matter, though they both knew it did. "Then I met my husband, we had children, and later we moved to America for better opportunities. There was never time or money for music after that. But you remember. Your hands remember," Catherine said. "Yes. Sometimes I play on a paper keyboard I draw for myself." Elena laughed softly at Catherine's surprised expression. "Silly, I know, but it helps me remember the feeling." Catherine stood abruptly and walked to the piano. Her fingers brushed the keys without pressing them. "I've been playing since I was 4. The best teachers, the finest instruments, every advantage." She turned back to Elena, frustration evident in her voice. "And yet when I play it sounds empty. Technically correct but soulless." That's what my last instructor wrote in her evaluation. The admission seemed to cost her, as if she were confessing a terrible secret. "My mother was a concert pianist before she married my father," Catherine continued. "She gave it up to be a Wellington, but she made sure I would carry on the family's musical tradition. It's what's expected." The last words held a weight that Elena understood all too well. The burden of expectations, of living a life mapped out by others. "What do you want?" Elena asked quietly. Catherine looked startled, as if no one had ever asked her that question before. "What do you mean?" "If you could choose, would you still play piano? Or would you do something else?" A complicated series of emotions crossed Catherine's face. "I've never really thought about it that way. The piano has always been part of my life, like breathing." She paused, considering. "I don't think I want to stop playing. I just want it to mean something when I do. I want to play the way you do, like the music matters." Elena stood up, suddenly aware that she had been sitting while the young woman of the house was standing. Another unspoken rule broken. "Miss Wellington..." "Catherine," the young woman interrupted. "Please, when we're alone like this, call me Catherine. That wouldn't be proper. Nothing about this is proper, Catherine said with a small laugh. The Wellington heiress asking the cleaning lady for music advice? My mother would have a fit. Despite herself, Elena smiled. Catherine then, but only when we're alone. I have a proposal, Catherine said, her voice taking on a new energy. My recital is in 3 weeks. I'll be playing Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. It's a beautiful piece, but I can't seem to capture its essence. The notes are there, but the feeling isn't. She took a deep breath. Would you help me? Elena's eyes widened. Help you? But I'm not a teacher. I barely play myself. Your instructors are professionals with all their technical knowledge, yes, Catherine interrupted. And they've taught me plenty about finger positioning and timing and dynamics. But none of them have taught me what you know instinctively, how to make the music live. Elena shook her head. Your mother would never allow it. She doesn't need to know. We could meet in the mornings before anyone else is around. Like today. Catherine's eyes were bright with excitement. Just for a few weeks until the recital. I don't know the piece you're playing, Elena protested. Catherine went to a shelf and pulled down a book of sheet music. Here, take this home. Listen to recordings if you can. Get to know it. She pressed the book into Elena's hands. Please, Mrs. Morales, I need your help. Elena looked down at the book of Chopin's Nocturnes. It was beautifully bound, probably worth more than she earned in a week. I can't take this. It's just a loan, Catherine insisted. And there's something else. She hesitated, then seemed to make up her mind. I want to make this a fair exchange. You help me play with feeling, and I'll help you improve your technique. We can teach each other. Elena stood speechless, the book of Nocturnes heavy in her hands. The offer was tempting, more than tempting. A chance to play again, to learn properly. But the risks were enormous. We would need to be careful, she said finally. If your mother found out, she won't, Catherine assured her. She never comes to this part of the house before noon. And father is away more often than not these days. She looked at Elena with a mixture of hope and determination. We'll be careful. This can be our secret. Our secret. The phrase hung in the air between them, both thrilling and dangerous. I should get back to work, Elena said, not quite agreeing but not refusing either. People will wonder where I am. Catherine nodded. Tomorrow morning? 7 o'clock? No one will be around then. Elena tucked the book of Nocturnes into her cleaning cart, covering it with a cloth. I'll think about it. But they both knew she would be there. That night, in her small apartment across town, Elena sat at her kitchen table long after her evening meal. The Chopin book lay open before her. She had found a recording of the Nocturne on her old phone, and the haunting melody played softly as she studied the notes on the page. Her fingers moved across the tabletop, following the pattern of keys, feeling the music take shape even without a real piano. It had been so long since she'd read proper sheet music, yet it came back to her more easily than she'd expected. Tomorrow she would touch a real piano again. Tomorrow she would begin teaching a Wellington about passion and feeling. Tomorrow she would step even further across the invisible line that separated their worlds. Elena closed her eyes, letting the final notes of the Nocturne wash over her. For the first time in years, she felt the stirring of something she had long ago buried. Not just the love of music, but the sense that her life might still hold unexpected possibilities. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 6:30 as Elena slipped through the service entrance of the Wellington estate. The house was still and silent, wrapped in the soft blue light of early morning. She moved quietly through the kitchen and down the back corridor, her heart beating a nervous rhythm in her chest. This was madness, she told herself, coming to the house before her shift, sneaking around like a thief. If she lost this job, finding another one that paid as well would be nearly impossible at her age. And yet her feet carried her forward, drawn by a pull stronger than fear. The music room door was closed. Elena hesitated, then knocked softly. Come in, Catherine's voice called from inside. Elena entered to find Catherine already seated at the piano. Dressed simply in a sweater and slacks, her hair tied back. A steaming mug sat on a coaster atop the piano. You came, Catherine said, relief evident in her voice. I wasn't sure you would. Neither was I, Elena admitted, closing the door behind her. I made coffee. Catherine gestured to a second mug on a small table. I wasn't sure how you'd take it, so I brought cream and sugar. The gesture, so ordinary yet so unexpected, caught Elena off guard. In 15 years of working in this house, no one had ever offered her coffee. Black is fine, thank you. She took the mug, warming her hands around it. I practiced last night, she added. Without a piano, I mean. Catherine smiled. So did I. With a piano, but I tried to think about what you said, about feeling the music, not just playing the notes. She patted the bench beside her. Will you sit with me? Elena hesitated, then set down her coffee and joined Catherine on the bench. Their shoulders nearly touched, and Elena became acutely aware of the contrast between them. Youth and middle age, privilege and working class, the employer's daughter and the hired help. I thought we could start with you playing the piece for me, Elena suggested, so I can hear where you are with it. Catherine nodded, positioning her hands over the keys. She took a deep breath and began to play. The nocturne flowed from her fingers. Technically flawless, each note perfectly timed, each dynamic shift executed precisely. And yet there was something missing. When she finished, Catherine looked expectantly at Elena. Well? Elena considered her words carefully. You play beautifully. Your technique is, she searched for the right word, impressive. But you're thinking too much, Elena said gently. I can see it in your face, in your posture. You're concentrating so hard on getting everything right that the music becomes, she gestured vaguely with her hands, mechanical. Catherine's shoulders slumped. That's exactly what my instructor says, though not as kindly. Do you know what this piece is about? Elena asked. Catherine looked surprised by the question. It's a nocturne. Night music, yes, but what is it saying? What story is it telling? Catherine frowned, considering. I've never thought about it that way. It's just a beautiful composition. Elena nodded, understanding the problem more clearly now. Close your eyes, she instructed. What? Close your eyes. I want you to listen not to the notes, but to what's beneath them. Catherine looked skeptical, but closed her eyes. Elena began to play. She didn't have Catherine's technical precision. Her tempo varied slightly, and she simplified some of the more complex passages, but she played with her heart open. Under her hands, the nocturne became a lullaby, a confession, a prayer whispered in darkness. When she finished, she looked over to find Catherine watching her, eyes wide with wonder. That was... Catherine shook her head at a loss for words. How did you do that? When I play this piece, I think of my grandmother singing to me when I couldn't sleep. I think of the night sky over the pampas where I grew up, so full of stars it hurt to look at them. I think of all the things we wish for in the darkness that we're afraid to say in the light. Elena shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. That's what a nocturne is to me. No one has ever explained music to me like that, Catherine said quietly. My instructors talk about hand position and phrasing and historical context, but never about... She gestured toward Elena's heart. This. Now you try again, Elena encouraged. But this time think about something that moves you. A memory of feeling whatever this music brings to your mind. Catherine took a deep breath and began to play again. The change wasn't dramatic, not at first, but as she continued, something shifted. Her rigid posture softened. Her brow, usually furrowed in concentration, relaxed, and the music began to breathe. When she finished, she looked up at Elena with a small, surprised smile. Better, Elena said, smiling back. Much better. That first morning session established a pattern for the days that followed. They would meet before the household stirred, sharing coffee and conversation before turning to the music. Elena taught Catherine to connect emotionally with each piece she played, while Catherine helped Elena refine her technique and expand her musical vocabulary. Look at this passage, Catherine would say, pointing to a complex run of notes. Try bringing out the top line more. Let it sing above the accompaniment. Or Elena would place her hand over Catherine's, guiding her. Feel the pulse here? Like a heartbeat. Not too strict, not too loose. Like breathing. Their lessons often stretched beyond their planned hour, both reluctant to end this time that existed outside the normal boundaries of their lives. As Elena worked through her regular cleaning duties later in the day, she would sometimes pass Catherine in a hallway or doorway. They maintained their formal roles in public. Good afternoon, Miss Wellington, and thank you, Mrs. Morales. But their eyes held the secret of their shared mornings. 2 weeks into their arrangement, Catherine arrived at their lesson with a small package. For you, she said, handing it to Elena. Elena unwrapped it carefully to find a portable digital piano keyboard, small enough to fit in her apartment but with weighted keys that felt like a real piano. Catherine, I can't accept this, Elena protested, even as her fingers itched to try it. It's not a gift, it's a tool, Catherine insisted, for practice. Besides, it's just gathering dust in my dorm room at university. I never use it. Elena knew she should refuse, but the thought of having a real keyboard to practice on was too tempting. Thank you, she said simply, fighting back unexpected tears. Their lessons expanded beyond Chopin's Nocturne. Catherine brought out pieces she had struggled with over the years, and together they found the emotional core of each one. Elena shared the folk songs of her childhood, teaching Catherine melodies that had never been written down but passed from generation to generation. My mother would be horrified. Catherine laughed one morning after they had spent half an hour on an Argentine folk dance. All those years of classical training, and here I am learning music with no pedigree. Music doesn't need a pedigree, Elena replied. It just needs to be true. As the days passed, their conversation wandered beyond music. Catherine spoke of the pressure she felt as the Wellington heir, the expectations that had shaped her life since childhood. Elena shared stories of her homeland, her children now grown and living their own lives, her dreams deferred but never forgotten. The morning before the recital, Catherine arrived at their lesson looking pale and tense. I don't think I can do it, she confessed, her hands trembling slightly as she sat at the piano. What if I forget everything we've worked on? What if I go back to playing like a machine? Elena sat beside her on the bench. Play it for me now, one last time. Catherine shook her head. I can't, I'm too nervous. Close your eyes, Elena instructed just as she had that first morning. Breathe with me. In through your nose, out through your mouth. They sat in silence for a moment, their breathing synchronizing. Elena placed her hand lightly on Catherine's back, feeling the tension gradually release. Now don't play for an audience, or for your mother, or even for yourself, Elena said softly. Play for the music. Let it say what it needs to say. Catherine began to play. The nocturne unfolded like a night-blooming flower, delicate and mysterious. Elena watched the transformation she had witnessed over these past weeks, the technical skill now infused with genuine feeling, the perfect marriage of head and heart. When the final note faded, they sat in silence for a moment. Remember that feeling tomorrow, Elena said finally. That's all you need to do. Catherine turned to her, eyes bright with unshed tears. Thank you, Elena, for everything. You did the work, Elena replied. I just helped you find what was already there. As they gathered their things, Elena realized that tomorrow would mark the end of their secret morning sessions. The thought left an unexpected hollowness in her chest. These hours had become precious to her, not just the return to music, but the friendship that had grown between them, bridging worlds she had thought forever separate. After the recital, Catherine said suddenly, as if reading her thoughts, we should continue. If you want to, that is. Elena looked up, surprised and touched. I'd like that very much. What had begun as a chance encounter had become something neither of them had expected, a connection that transcended age, class, and circumstance, founded on their shared love of music but growing into something deeper. Mutual respect, genuine affection, and the rare gift of being truly seen by another person. The Wellington estate buzzed with activity on the day of the recital. Florists arrived early, filling the grand salon with arrangements of white roses and lilies. Caterers bustled in and out of the kitchen, preparing delicate hors d'oeuvres and chilling bottles of champagne. A small army of additional household staff polished silver, arranged chairs, and transformed the already elegant home into a showcase worthy of the esteemed guests who would soon arrive. Elena moved through the chaos quietly, focusing on her usual tasks while trying to stay out of everyone's way. Lady Wellington stalked from room to room, inspecting every detail with a critical eye, issuing sharp corrections whenever something failed to meet her exacting standards. Mrs. Morales, Lady Wellington called as Elena was finishing the upstairs hallway. Make sure the guest bathroom has fresh hand towels. The monogrammed ones, not the everyday set. Yes, ma'am. Right away. Elena hurried to comply, grateful for the simple, clear instruction amid the day's tension. She hadn't seen Catherine since their lesson the previous morning. The young woman had been whisked away for a final rehearsal with her instructor. then for hair and makeup appointments arranged by her mother. Elena wondered how Catherine was feeling, if she was nervous, if she remembered what they had practiced together, if she would find that emotional connection when she sat before an audience of the city's elite. By late afternoon, Elena had retreated to the kitchen with the other household staff. They would remain on duty during the event, but were expected to stay hidden from view unless specifically needed. "Heard the young miss is performing tonight, Mrs. Chen," the cook remarked as she arranged petit fours on a silver tray. "Plays like an angel, they say." "She does," Elena agreed quietly, earning a curious look from the older woman. Through the kitchen door, they could hear the murmur of arriving guests, the tinkling of crystal, the rise and fall of polite conversation. Every so often the butler would enter with instructions. More ice needed, a tray of canapes, a guest requesting a particular type of tea. "Her mother's been planning this for months," whispered Rosa, one of the younger maids. "All those fancy music people coming to hear her. I'd be terrified." Elena thought of Catherine, of their weeks of work together, of the beauty the young woman could create when she allowed herself to feel the music. "She'll be wonderful," she said with conviction. The butler appeared in the doorway. "They're about to begin. Everyone stay quiet and out of sight unless called upon." The staff nodded, well trained in the art of invisibility. But as the others settled in to wait, Elena found herself drawn toward the sound of the gathering. She slipped out of the kitchen and down the hallway, finding a spot just outside the grand salon where she could peek in without being noticed. The room was filled with elegantly dressed guests seated in neat rows facing the Steinway, which had been moved to the center of the salon for the occasion. At the front of the room, Lady Wellington was introducing her daughter, her voice carrying that particular tone of practiced modesty that somehow managed to convey intense pride. "Delighted to present my daughter, Catherine, performing Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, followed by selections from Bach and Debussy." There was polite applause as Catherine appeared. Elena's breath caught at the sight of her. Gone was the casual, earnest young woman of their morning sessions. In her place stood a vision in a midnight blue gown, her hair swept up in an elegant style that emphasized her long neck and delicate features. She looked every inch the Wellington heiress, poised, beautiful, untouchable. Catherine took her seat at the piano, adjusted her posture, and placed her hands on the keys. For a long moment she didn't move. The room grew quiet, expectant. Elena could see, even from a distance, the slight tension in Catherine's shoulders, the almost imperceptible tremble in her hands. "Come on," Elena thought fiercely. "Remember what we practiced. Play from your heart." Catherine began to play. The opening notes were technically perfect but stiff, lacking the emotional depth they had discovered together. Elena could see Catherine struggling, her body rigid with concentration and nerves. The audience wouldn't notice anything wrong. To their ears, the performance was flawless, but Elena knew Catherine was losing the connection to the music. Then, halfway through the piece, Catherine faltered. Her hands froze above the keys. She tried to continue, hit a wrong note, stopped again. A murmur rippled through the audience. Lady Wellington's smile remained fixed in place, but her eyes flashed with alarm. Catherine tried once more to resume playing, but her hands were shaking visibly now. She looked up, panic written across her features, and then somehow her gaze found Elena partially hidden in the doorway. Without thinking, Elena stepped into the room. Ignoring the curious stares of the guests, she walked to the piano and gently touched Catherine's shoulder. "It's okay," she whispered. "May I?" Relief flooded Catherine's face. She nodded and rose from the bench. Elena sat down, aware of the confusion spreading through the room. Lady Wellington had half risen from her seat, her expression a mixture of shock and outrage. But before anyone could intervene, Elena began to play. She picked up the nocturne where Catherine had faltered, letting the music flow through her fingers. She played not for the wealthy audience or for herself, but for Catherine, for the weeks they had shared, for the friendship that had grown between them, for the beauty they had found together in this very piece. The room grew still. Even Lady Wellington sank back into her chair, momentarily speechless. Elena lost herself in the music, eyes closed, unaware of the stunned expressions around her. When she finished the nocturne, she transitioned seamlessly into one of the folk melodies she had taught Catherine. It's simple, heartfelt melody a stark contrast to the classical pieces that had been planned. As the final notes faded, there was a moment of complete silence. Then from the back of the room someone began to applaud. Others joined in, the applause building until it filled the salon. Helena opened her eyes to see Catherine beaming at her, clapping harder than anyone. The spell broke when Lady Wellington rose to her feet, her face flushed with anger. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, advancing toward the piano. "Mrs. Morales, you are here to serve, not to perform. This is completely inappropriate." The applause died away awkwardly. Guests exchanged uncomfortable glances, suddenly aware they had been appreciating the playing of a servant. "Mother, please," Catherine began, stepping forward. "Not now." "Catherine," Lady Wellington cut her off. "Mrs. Morales, you will leave immediately. Consider yourself dismissed. I will not tolerate such a display in my home." Elena stood, her moment of triumph crumbling into humiliation. She had known the risks, but in her concern for Catherine, she had forgotten the rigid boundaries of the world she inhabited. "I apologize for the disruption," she said quietly, dignity intact despite her racing heart. "I meant no disrespect." "Mrs. Morales is not to blame," Catherine said, her voice stronger now. "I asked her to play. I couldn't continue and she saved the performance." "We will discuss this later," her mother hissed. "Now please see to our guest while I deal with this situation." Elena moved to leave, keeping her head high as she walked through the crowd of watching strangers. She had nearly reached the door when a man stepped forward from among the guests. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carrying through the uncomfortable silence. "That was extraordinary playing. Are you a professional pianist?" Elena shook her head, too stunned to speak. "Antonio Ricci," he introduced himself with a slight bow. "I'm on the faculty at the conservatory. I would very much like to speak with you about your playing." "This is hardly the time." "Antonio," Lady Wellington interjected, moving to usher Elena from the room. "On the contrary." "Victoria," Professor Ricci replied smoothly. "Your recital has introduced us to a remarkable talent. I'd consider that a great success." Other guests began to murmur in agreement, the initial shock giving way to genuine interest. Lady Wellington's face tightened, caught between social protocol and fury. "We can discuss this another time. For now, I believe we were promised refreshments in the garden room." She turned to the butler. "James, please show everyone through." As the guests began to move toward the garden room, Catherine quickly approached Elena. "Don't go," she whispered urgently. "Wait in the music room, please." Elena hesitated, torn between the humiliation of staying and the defeat of leaving. "Professor Ricci wants to talk to you," Catherine pressed. "This could be important." "I'll handle my mother." Before Elena could respond, Catherine was pulled away by her mother, who led her firmly toward the waiting guests, speaking in harsh whispers. Left alone in the emptying salon, Elena stood uncertainly by the piano that had brought her such joy and now such trouble. In a matter of minutes, her modest life had been completely upended. She had lost her job, humiliated herself before a room of strangers, and yet she had also played better than she ever had before, had been recognized by a professor from the conservatory, had done something brave and true. The question now was whether Catherine's support would be enough to weather the storm they had created together, or if this moment of connection across their separate worlds would ultimately prove impossible to sustain. Elena sat alone in the music room, her fingers tracing the keys of the piano without pressing them. Outside, she could hear the muffled sounds of the reception continuing. Polite laughter, the clink of glasses, the rise and fall of conversation. She had been sitting there for nearly an hour, wondering if she should simply leave. Perhaps Catherine had been swept up in her obligations as hostess. Perhaps Lady Wellington had forbidden her daughter from speaking to the disgraced housekeeper again. The door opened, and Elena looked up expectantly. But it wasn't Catherine who entered. It was Professor Ricci, the man from the conservatory. "Ah, there you are," he said, closing the door behind him. "Miss Wellington said I might find you here." He gestured to the empty chair near the piano. "May I?" Elena nodded, suddenly self-conscious about her plain uniform, her working hands, her entire presence in this elegant room. "I must apologize for the awkwardness earlier," Professor Ricci said as he took a seat. "But I couldn't let you leave without speaking to you. Your playing was—" He paused, searching for the right word. "Authentic. Something we don't hear often enough these days." Thank you, Elena said quietly. But I'm not trained. Not properly. That much is evident, he replied with a small smile. Your technique needs refinement. But technique can be taught. What you have, that connection to the music, that ability to convey emotion, that can't be taught so easily. Elena looked down at her hands. It doesn't matter now. I've lost my job here. Perhaps that's not the tragedy, it seems. Professor Ricci leaned forward slightly. The conservatory has a program for adult students. Not the traditional degree track, but special instruction for those with unusual circumstances or backgrounds. I believe you would be an excellent candidate. Elena stared at him, certain she had misunderstood. Are you offering me lessons? I'm offering you an opportunity, he corrected gently. To develop your gift properly. There would be a scholarship, of course. Before Elena could respond, the door opened again. This time it was Catherine, followed by her mother. Lady Wellington's face was tight with barely contained fury, while Catherine looked both defiant and nervous. Antonio, Lady Wellington said, her voice brittle. I see you found our former employee. Indeed, Professor Ricci replied, standing. We were just discussing her remarkable talent. Lady Wellington's smile didn't reach her eyes. How kind of you to take an interest. However, Mrs. Morales was just leaving. Mother, Catherine began, but Lady Wellington silenced her with a sharp look. I've already explained my position, Catherine. The matter is closed. Elena stood, gathering her dignity. It's all right. I should go. She turned to Professor Ricci. Thank you for your kindness. Wait. Catherine stepped forward, placing herself between her mother and Elena. I have something to say, and you're both going to listen. The authority in her voice, so like her mother's and yet somehow entirely her own, brought the room to a standstill. For weeks now, Mrs. Morales has been teaching me to play with feeling, not just technique. She's the reason I was selected for the showcase at the university next month. She's the reason I finally understand what music is supposed to be. Lady Wellington's expression flickered between shock and disbelief. You've been taking lessons from the cleaning woman? Yes, Catherine said firmly, and she's been a better teacher than any of the expensive instructors you've hired over the years. This is absurd. You are a Wellington, and what does that mean, Mother? Catherine interrupted. That I should only learn from people with the right pedigree? That talent and passion count for nothing if they come from someone who cleans our toilets? Elena flinched at the blunt words, but Catherine wasn't finished. Mrs. Morales has more musical understanding in her little finger than most of the people drinking our champagne out there, and if you fire her for helping me when I froze on stage, then I'll withdraw from the university showcase. I'll never play another note at any social function. I'll make sure everyone knows exactly why. The room fell silent. Mother and daughter stared at each other, neither willing to back down. Professor Ricci cleared his throat softly. If I might offer a suggestion, he said, it seems to me there might be a compromise that would benefit everyone. 3 pairs of eyes turned to him expectantly. Mrs. Morales clearly has talent that deserves cultivation, he continued, and Miss Wellington has benefited from her instruction. What if Mrs. Morales were to continue in a different capacity? Not as household staff, but as a music consultant. She could work with Catherine on her university showcase pieces while also attending classes at the conservatory. Lady Wellington's lips thinned. That's preposterous. Mrs. Morales has no credentials, no formal training. Yet she played Chopin more movingly than many of my credentialed students. Professor Ricci interrupted gently. Victoria, you've always claimed to value musical excellence above all else. Here it is. Discovered in the most unexpected place in your own home. Are you really going to turn your back on that? Because it doesn't fit your notion of where talent should come from? Lady Wellington looked from the professor to her daughter to Elena, calculation visible behind her eyes. Elena realized she was weighing social embarrassment against her daughter's threat, looking for the path that would cause least damage to the Wellington reputation. A trial period, she said finally. 3 months. If Catherine's playing improves demonstrably in that time, we can discuss a more permanent arrangement. She fixed Elena with a stern look. You will be compensated fairly for your time, Mrs. Morales, but I expect absolute discretion about the circumstances of this unusual situation. It wasn't an apology, not even close, but it was an acknowledgement, however grudging, that Elena had something valuable to offer. Thank you, Lady Wellington, Elena said simply. I would be happy to continue working with Catherine. Excellent. Professor Ricci clapped his hands together. And you'll consider the conservatory program as well? Elena glanced at Catherine, who was beaming with triumph and relief. Yes, she said. I think I will. Wonderful. I'll have the paperwork sent over tomorrow. Professor Ricci turned to Lady Wellington. Victoria, shall we rejoin your guests? I believe they're waiting for an explanation of tonight's unexpected entertainment. With a tight nod, Lady Wellington allowed herself to be escorted from the room, leaving Catherine and Elena alone. As soon as the door closed, Catherine rushed forward and hugged Elena tightly. I'm so sorry about all of this, she whispered. But also not sorry at all. Elena laughed softly, returning the embrace. It's all right. I think it needed to happen. Are you really going to study at the conservatory? Catherine asked, pulling back to look at Elena with shining eyes. I think I am, Elena replied, still hardly believing it herself. At my age, starting over like this? It's not starting over, Catherine corrected. It's finally getting the chance you should have had years ago. They sat together at the piano, side by side as they had been during their early morning lessons. But everything had changed. The secret they had shared had been brought into the light, transforming both their lives in ways neither could have imagined when Elena's fingers first touched the keys 3 weeks ago. 1 year later, small recital hall at the conservatory was filled to capacity. On stage, a grand piano waited in a pool of soft light. Programs rustled as the audience settled, anticipating the evening's performance, a special showcase of student work. Backstage, Elena smoothed her new dress, a simple but elegant black sheath that she had saved for months to purchase. At 53, she was by far the oldest student performing that night, but over the past year, she had stopped caring about such distinctions. Nervous? Catherine asked, appearing at her side in a midnight blue gown, reminiscent of the one she'd worn at last year's fateful recital. Terrified, Elena admitted with a smile. But the good kind of terrified. You're going to be amazing, just like you were in Rome last month. Elena still couldn't quite believe that memory. Playing at a small but prestigious festival in Italy, with Catherine in the audience cheering her on. The scholarship from the conservatory had opened doors she never knew existed, leading to opportunities that had once seemed impossible. Ladies and gentlemen, the announcer's voice came over the speakers. Please welcome our next performer, Elena Morales, presenting an original composition entitled Boundaries Crossed. That's my cue, Elena whispered. Catherine squeezed her hand. Remember what you taught me, play from your heart. Elena walked onto the stage, the applause washing over her. She took her seat at the piano, adjusted the bench, and looked out at the audience. In the front row sat Professor Ricci, nodding encouragingly. Beside him, surprisingly, was Lady Wellington, her face unreadable but her presence itself a kind of victory. And next to her mother was Catherine, eyes bright with pride and affection. Elena placed her hands on the keys and began to play the piece she had composed over the past year. A piece that told the story of two women from different worlds, brought together by music and courage and the willingness to see beyond the boundaries that separated them. As the music filled the hall, Elena thought of the journey that had brought her here. From cleaning the Wellington estate to studying at the conservatory, from secret morning lessons to public performances, from being invisible to being truly seen. Later that evening, after the applause and the congratulations, after Lady Wellington's stiff but sincere compliment and Professor Ricci's enthusiastic praise, Elena and Catherine slipped away to a quiet cafe near the conservatory. They sat at a small table by the window, sipping tea and talking about Elena's upcoming teaching position at a community music school, a position that would allow her to pass on what she had learned to children who, like her younger self, had talent but limited means. I've been thinking about that first day, Catherine said, stirring her tea thoughtfully. When I caught you playing the piano. The day I nearly lost my job? Elena laughed. The day everything changed, Catherine corrected her. For both of us. She reached across the table and squeezed Elena's hand. I'm so glad you touched that piano. Elena smiled, thinking of the unlikely friendship that had blossomed between them, bridging worlds that should